Thank you very much. And it's a hard act to follow, all of these great panelists. So what I would like to do is to concentrate on one aspect regarding the Western narrative against Xizang or against Tibet, and that is the issue of language. However, before going into that, I would like to, if I may, provide some historical context because people are asking about the Dalai Lama. In 1959, there was a peaceful unification that took place between what was known as Tibet before and China. 1951, and it was peaceful because even the Dalai Lama signed the agreement for Tibet to become part of China. In fact, Tibet was always part of China. In the 17th century, especially, it is known in the Song dynasty that Tibet was part of China. So it is not really that controversial. However, in 1959, the Chinese government and the Communist Party of China, as part of their push to further develop socialism all over China, including in the West. And in 1959, they began plans to abolish serfdom. This was a major event to take place. I mean, Li Jing mentioned the atrocities that existed before that we should believe her. Yes, I believe her, because when we visited there, we had access to a video that showed the situation there before the abolition of serfdom. I mean, I can never forget that. In this video, we see very clearly in a barn shed, in a cow shed, you have a mother and three children living in a cow shed. They lived there until they were taken out in the morning to work as slaves on the field. And the one that we saw, that's four generations living in that cow shed. So it's not there's no way one could exaggerate the horrific situation of serfdom before 1951, before 1959. However, as China was moving towards abolishing serfdom, the Dalai Lama and a small clique of privileged elite serf owners, of course, started organizing an armed uprising against the central government, directly influenced and paid for by the CIA in 1959. This did not succeed, and the Dalai Lama fled Tibet to go to India, where he is now today, whereas, on the other hand, the Communist Party of China and People's Republic of China are going ahead further and further with regards to socialism in that region as part of the overall development in the country. Regarding language, I would like to say the New York Times carried an article in January 2025 building up to the anniversary, the 90th anniversary of the birth of Dalai Lama in India. And in that article, they said that the Tibetan language is being squashed, is being discriminated against, is being eliminated by the central Chinese government. What we found, I think Leonardo and Gustavo will agree, what we found was quite the opposite. It was I've seen a lot of astonishing things in my life regarding false narratives, but I think this is one of the biggest false narratives I have ever seen in my life. And as part of this trip that we had in the fall of 2023, we had able to visit we have Xizang, which is autonomous region, and right next there's a neighboring province of Qinghai. Now, in Shanghai, you have a very important Tibetan population. Now, we visit a boarding school in this area. Now, when we talk about boarding school, I mean, why is there boarding schools? Because in rural areas such as that, it's impossible to have a school close to where people live. It's so dispersed. And so boarding school assists people to attend school, the kids to attend school, and at the same time keep their ties with the family. Now, in this boarding school that we visited, first of all, it's not obligatory. They can go if they want as well, while they have excellent sleeping quarters. They could go home every night if they like, or on the weekend. Some of them even stay on the weekend. They like it so much in order to have further exchange with their teachers to improve their learning. So when we were there, of course, we asked them, what are the language taught there? What was the first thing they said? Tibetan, Han Chinese, English, and of course, science, physics, mathematics, etc. But Tibetan was the first language that was being taught there. Now, there's another interesting aspect. Well, suppression of are people forced to speak languages? Well, in a sense, yes. But ironically, in the areas of Xizang, in a university, at least one university, which is in the quite rural area of Xizang, where there are both Tibetans as well as Han Chinese, guess what? The Han Chinese are forced to learn Tibetan. So it's that way. It's quite the opposite. The Tibetan language is fostered, promoted, as other speakers have mentioned. But even Han Chinese are required to learn Tibetan in the region that they live. Regarding the language, once again, it's hard to explain. I said it's one of the most contradictory or uh, opposition that I've ever heard regarding language against a cultural minority. So in order to bring this up in context, allow me to give you this short description of the conditions of the native nations in Canada and the United States. Because according to the New York Times article, of course, they said they're suppressing the Tibetan language in China, but we in the United States, we have learned from our past regarding residential schools and all that. They have not learned from the past. Firstly, what has happened in Canada and the United States? For example, in order to go into this, I had a very intimate and interesting conversation with Ellen Gabrielle, who is perhaps the most well-known Aboriginal, the most Aboriginal person in Canada, known for her dedication to the cause of the Aboriginal people, of the Indigenous people. And here's what she told me about language. She shared this intimate view of herself and the family. When she was being brought up, her mother, there was so much pressure to not speak the Mohawk language that her mother had to whisper in her ear when she spoke in the Mohawk language. And when she went to school, some of the teachers, not all, some of the students, but not all, would utter racist remarks against her, saying that they were unruly. They had no place at all in school. They were savages and all that. But in this case, her mother succeeded in encouraging Ellen to carry on her work, and she later became an outstanding author and a producer of documentaries. Now, there's also another example. I mean, according to the New York Times, all this situation has been solved. However, if it's been solved, how come? What is the language situation of the First Nations in the United States and Canada? Well, compared to Tibet, where 100% of the Tibetans speak the language, and even some Han Chinese in the Tibetan area speak that language, Tibetan language. What is the situation? For example, in the United States, guess what portion of the First Nations in the United States speak their own language? 13%. In Canada, it's even worse. Only 5% of the First Nations in Canada can speak their original language. And this is a report not from a left-wing newspaper. It's actual government statistics regarding languages. So to say that language is being suppressed in Tibet, one has to really see, by comparing to the situation that existed before, that this is not the case at all. Now, we have the residential schools. In Canada, for example, there was over 150,000, and I'm saying in Canada, 150,000 young Aboriginal people were taken by force of arms, that is, with the Bible in one hand, whether it's Protestant or Catholic, and the other hand, the rifle. 150,000 taken by force from the families to be put into residential schools. And there they were not allowed to speak their language. Their hair was cut. And they had what the goal of this was to take the Indian out of the Indians. And this is what the residential schools in the United States and Canada are all about. Now, I would also, I'm comparing United States and Canada on the one hand with the situation in Xizang and Qinghai on the other hand with regards to boarding schools or residential schools. I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that the boarding schools in Qinghai and Xizang are better than the residential schools that existed or still existed in the United States and Canada. What am I saying is that they are exact opposite. On the one hand, the boarding school in these areas, okay, is an extension of the socialist system that is being developed by the PRC and the CPC to raise the standard of living of all of the people in the region, to introduce modernity, etc. That's one thing. On the other hand, the Canadian system is different, or the American system is different. It is an extension of savage colonial settler mentality and the use of arms to try to destroy the original people. And the residential schools, the so-called boarding schools, is part of the settler colonial policy of eliminating the people of the original people in the United States and Canada, but they still carry on, and the resistance is sort of important. For example, we can remember Standing Rock. How can we forget Standing Rock? Not too long ago, where the people stood up to oppose the pipeline going into their areas, and many were arrested. There's also the example of Leonard Peltier, who was just recently released from prison, but he spent his whole life there, literally his whole life, simply because he's a Native person. And in Canada, we have a very famous event that took place, but it might not be known to everyone. It's called the 1990 so-called Oka crisis. What happened there? The local golf course outside of Montreal tried to extend the golf course for some parking area for the people who are part of this exclusive country club, right on the ceremonial sacred lands of the Mohawk people. And there you had literally a confrontation between, on the one hand, the Canadian Army, the provincial police, and the Montreal police descended upon the Mohawk people who stood their ground, arms in hand, to defend their own land. So, this is the reality. New York Times is a bit off. The issue has not been settled. It's still ongoing now. So I'd just like to mention one point in closing, and that is a nice anecdote that we learned when we were in September, October 2023, that we visited many cultural institutions there, and one of them we discovered that they had discovered what they call the Furi manuscripts. This was named after a town in a very rural area. Now, in this Furi manuscripts, which were discovered just a few years ago, you have the entire description of the customs, society, the political makeup of the Tibetan people going back many, many centuries. So the question is, if China was interested in destroying Tibetan language, culture, and history, why would they have a special section of an institution that is dedicated to showing through these Furi manuscripts what the tradition and the history is of the Tibetan people, so that is so much developed and encouraged by the central government of China in conjunction with the local authorities. Thank you very much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.